Hello, I'm Jo Fay, and this is a SwissInfo podcast. SwissInfo is the multilingual and international public media company of Switzerland. Silicon Valley in California is home to the world's tech giants, but it's also a place with a stark contrast between unbridled innovation and deepening inequality. Can Switzerland's model offer solutions? That's today on the Swiss Connection Science podcast. In the current season of our Swiss Connection Science podcast, we've looked at innovation in Silicon Valley and how the counterculture movement of the 1960s and early 70s contributed to it. We've talked about things that Switzerland could learn from the Californian way, but today we'll delve into some more critical aspects of the tech business, including the poverty that lies just beyond the shiny tech offices and vast San Francisco campuses. I'm joined by our science journalist Sarah Ibrahim, who visited Silicon Valley last year. Sarah, what were you aiming for in this journey?
I tried to experience Silicon Valley firsthand. So to understand, of course, I had an idea, I had some fantasies about it, because we are surrounded by technologies coming from the Silicon Valley, right? I wanted to understand what really the Silicon Valley was and what was also the atmosphere there. And I was struck by all the contrasts that I could really see with my own eyes. And then I could hear from the interviewees that I had the chance to meet that it's really a very, very serious situation that unfortunately is not going better in terms of injustice and social also issues.
Okay. And while you were there, you spoke to Fred Turner, and he's a communications professor at Stanford University. What's his area of research, and why did you want to hear from him in particular?
Yeah, Fred Turner is a very important person when you want to understand something about the Silicon Valley, about the history, about how some specific movements in the Silicon Valley also shaped what we see today, the companies, the big tech companies that we see today. You have to talk to him. Fred Turner wrote a book some years ago about the counterculture. This movement, hippie movement, that really was so important in the Silicon Valley. And this was the first book exploring the importance of this movement for the world culture and the world way of thinking, the world mentality that is still behind the big tech industries, and also especially men that are in these companies, at the top of these companies. I knew that it was very hard to reach Fred Turner because in my group of journalists there in San Francisco, different people tried to reach out to him, and it was very hard. But for some reasons, I was lucky enough to get a meeting with him, and I went to Stanford to meet him in his office. And it was, I think, a meeting that I can never forget. It's really an experience that also marked me a lot.
Fantastic. Well, let's hear from him now.
So to understand the way that tech workers today might imagine that they are creating benevolent change, we have to go back to the ideology from the counterculture that's driving the tech world today, or at least still present. In the 1960s, in this area, among commune builders and so forth, there was a dream that if you just brought individuals together and used a technology like LSD then or like computers now that would change their minds, they would form a kind of community, a kind of political organization that's organized around consciousness and not around party politics. It turns out that when you do that, you build in the communes a world that is radically unequal, in which charismatic leaders rise to the top, mostly men. Women, people of color get pushed to the side. All the kind of cultural prejudices bubble up and replace the organizational work that politics used to do. You know, in a political vision, you have political institutions that distribute resources, that ensure equality, that you can change if you need to. In the countercultural vision, which is now also Silicon Valley's vision, you have technologically empowered individuals collaborating with people like themselves to replace politics with consciousness. If you replace politics with consciousness on a commune, that's one problem. If you do it at scale in a global network like Facebook, that's a much more serious problem. Because now you're starting to replace politics writ large with the fantasy of individually empowered communication of consciousness. That's terrible. You start replacing politics. What you get instead is what we see now. You get authoritarian individualism, you get polarization, you get people claiming that their most personal identity issues are in fact the essence of political life. It becomes impossible to have the kinds of disinterested public conversations that you have to have if you're going to live in a democracy. I think that in a lot of places there's a kind of sense that the individual is the center of the economy, the creative individual is meant to be the center of the tech firm. I think what people are discovering is that fantasy left over from the 1960s doesn't work very well when market forces kick in and you start to need things like unions. And unions don't fit the countercultural fantasy very well.
We see this.
Yeah, we see this very clearly.
So you think that it's still a really part, the counterculture of this dream or this fantasy that's still happening.
Absolutely. It's in the water, and the fact it's so in the water now that people don't know where it came from. But people wonder, where did this libertarian individualism come from in Silicon Valley? Where did the right wing come from? Well, the right wing came in part from right wing elements in the counterculture. And so, yes, this legacy of kind of technologically empowered individualism as a foundation of society, that dream is a countercultural dream, it's a technocratic dream, and it lives here today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you think that it's not really random that the Silicon Valley is here for these cultural reasons. We don't normally hear that so much. We hear that, because of the multiculturalism of this area, because of Stanford. So we hear other.
Well, allow me to offer a different interpretation.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's a great question. Why is Silicon Valley here, and why has it succeeded? There's a scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, named Natalie Saxenian, who I can introduce you to if you want, who wrote a book about this problem. And she pointed out that in the 1970s, at least, there were computer industries in Massachusetts and in California. Why did this one take off? Well, it came here partly because of Stanford and partly because there had been defense contractors here before. So companies like Lockheed had been making airplanes. NASA is here. So there's already a scientific group here. Silicon Valley is not the first science in this region. Okay. So then Stanford's president, Fred Turner, works very hard to bring technologists here. And people begin to cluster in the 40s and 50s. And as they boom, they build a kind of intensely collaborative style that really starts defeating the more separated hierarchical style that's in Boston. And part of that, I think, comes from being 3,000 miles away from traditional America. What we had here, though, is we had adventurers, we had hippies, we had gold miners, we had a tradition of experimentation and playfulness, a willingness to try anything. California has always been the place that draws people who want to make a life they can't find in the world they come from. And so we get those people still. And 50% of the people in Silicon Valley today were not born in the United States. Mm-hmm. More than 50% of the people in Silicon Valley today do not speak English as a first language at home. We are like an island of intellectual travelers.
I heard of speaking with other people that only if you don't fail, actually, you can, if you are successful, at least, because failure is also part of the culture. But if you are not successful at one point, you cannot be here. Is there this multiculturalism that is part of also this area? Do we see it really at the top edge?
That's a great question. I think we're seeing that change over time. I think in the 50s and 60s, we saw white men exclusively at the top. I think today that's changing rapidly. You know, the head of Alphabet is an Indian American. The head of other firms are from other places. I don't know how the ethnic politics play at the elite level here. My sense is that at the elite level, meaning programmers and advanced executives, what people really value is ability, and they'll take it wherever they can get it. I think people have no problem bringing in a programmer from India if they're the best programmer. Boom. Down the ladder, though, it gets really... So this book I did called Seeing Silicon Valley, which tries to focus on the working class. Mm-hmm. And the working class here is often Mexican-American, or black, or white, or Asian. But it's almost invisible, I think, to that kind of elite reckoning. There's real poverty here. There's serious poverty here. There's real hunger here. And I think that the kind of cultural diversity at the elite level might mask the way that the elite level doesn't pay any attention to the support workers who are really making things happen. And that's one of the legacies of the counterculture as well. The communes that were built in the 1960s were often placed in land that was owned by or inhabited by Mexican Americans and Native Americans, and they were mostly wealthy white settlers who were being the commune people. And one of the ironies of the counterculture, I think, is that the rhetoric of individual egalitarianism produces an actual society that is radically unequal. And that's what we see in Silicon Valley today as well. Mm-hmm. You know, I think in America, we've always been told that if we create contexts in which individuals can express themselves, everyone will be freer and society will be, by definition, more equal. And in fact, what you get is something really frightening. You get a world of many voices shouting and no one listening. I actually think that decentralization of the countercultural kind has produced a new kind of authoritarianism that we can't recognize easily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's very interesting also because Switzerland is a decentralized country. So in this sense, do you think there could be some similarities in the decentralization here?
No, not at all. No, Switzerland, to the extent that I know it, is both decentralized but also robustly governed. Mm-hmm. The state in Switzerland is extremely strong, as I understand it. Yeah, I mean, try to become a new citizen in Switzerland. You would discover very quickly how strong the state is and how tightly regulated it is. No, if anything, the Swiss state, though socially it's distributed, the Swiss state is, if anything, a little bit more conservative than most. Mm-hmm. And when was it that women got the right to vote in Switzerland?
Very
recently. Yeah, like the 70s. 72, I think, or 71. Yeah, 71, right? Yeah. So, I mean, that's... At one level, that's an embarrassing number, like deeply, right? But I think it's a measure of how powerful the Swiss state is. Mm-hmm. You know, so no. I mean, Switzerland is decentralized culturally, but it's highly centralized in a state way, mm-hmm. and the state's very powerful. And So I see no chance of Switzerland going that way.
Mm-hmm. Very often we hear that Switzerland is the Silicon Valley of Europe or would like to become the Silicon Valley. We know that based on what you said, it's almost impossible.
Well, I think it's different. I mean, I think you can be radically innovative without having the Silicon Valley culture. This is one of the myths that Silicon Valley has promoted. Silicon Valley has promoted the idea that you can only be successful like us if you are culturally like us. And I think that's a mistake. One of the things that I love about Europe in general, I don't know the Swiss situation well enough to comment, but certainly the German situation I do know well enough. You can see industrial innovation occurring in a context that always pays attention to the social good. It pays a lot of attention to, okay, if we do this thing, can we make money? Yes. But will we do a thing that's good for our society? Mm-hmm. So in Germany, you look at the Ruhrgebiet. The Ruhrgebiet has really effective automobile innovation. Has for many years. Produces great cars, great industrial innovation. Has it got problems? Absolutely. But it has workers' councils, it has stable companies, and it still innovates. Switzerland, very high quality of life. very low, if I'm correct, very low inequality. And yet, very high levels of innovation. The fantasy that a libertarian society, a libertarian culture is required for innovation is a legacy of the marketing of Silicon Valley, and it's not true. And that's one of the lessons that Europe teaches us every day if we watch it. You know, you might have seen on my door there, I actually have a copy of the German GDPR in German as a reminder that European regulation and European innovation are not necessarily opposed to one another. In Europe, we see that German regulation has affected not only how we use tech in Germany, but here in the United States. Europeans, if they can get it together across national boundaries and in the European Union, have a chance, I think, to set regulations around technology for the European Union that will have a global effect. But tech doesn't want to tell you that.
What would you say to European citizens or even Swiss citizens craving for reproducing the same dream in their country?
The Silicon Valley dream?
The Silicon Valley dream of innovation, of tech, of money.
Well, if we can find the dream to dreaming of building new kinds of companies that serve human needs, I say more power to you. If we take the dream as it actually exists in Silicon Valley, the dream of individual wealth, often acquired at the expense of building a society that is radically unequal, at the expense of workers, at the expense of the poor, at the expense of those who are young or pregnant or old. If that's the dream, that's a nightmare, and Switzerland shouldn't pursue it. My question is, can Switzerland continue to innovate in a way that preserves and drives and models an effective egalitarian society? And if it can, what can it teach us? You know, I mean, in my dream, Switzerland wouldn't come here to learn from Silicon Valley. Switzerland would invite us to go to Switzerland and learn how to do innovation with good social characteristics. I would like to see an in-migration program from the Swiss state that says, come here and learn how we do it. Yeah. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Thank you, Sarah. To read Sarah's article on Switzerland's lessons for Silicon Valley, go to swissinfo.ch's English website and search for Fred Turner. And in case you missed them, all our previous episodes this season on Silicon Valley are available online. We still have one more to come. That's next week on the Swiss Connection Science Podcast. Today's episode was recorded and edited by our science and video journalist Michele Andina. For more content, visit our website, swissinfo.ch. I'm Jo Fay. Thanks for listening. Get ready to explore the crossroads of innovation and entrepreneurship. Listen to our latest series of the Swiss Connection podcast, where we dive into the fascinating parallels between Switzerland and Silicon Valley. Switzerland and Silicon Valley are hubs of cutting-edge research and groundbreaking innovation. But what makes Silicon Valley the pinnacle of entrepreneurial culture and investment? Join our journalists Marc-André Miseret and Sarah Ibrahim as they venture into the heart of Silicon Valley. They sit down with Swiss-born entrepreneurs to uncover what Switzerland can learn from the world's tech capital. Get inspired by real stories from leading innovators in technology. Listen and subscribe to the Swiss Connection's latest series now, available wherever you get your podcasts.